Hi Cherubs, welcome to another video in the Self-Love September series. In this video I'm going to be talking about codependency, explaining a bit about what codependency is, how you can spot codependent tendencies or symptoms within yourself, and how to ultimately break that cycle of codependency. In the 1950s, counsellors who treated alcoholics began to refer to the spouses or partners of the alcoholics as codependents, and this was basically an umbrella term that was used to describe people with a certain set of symptoms that they had in common with each other. The terms codependent and codependency were used to describe a specific set of behaviours and symptoms that could be recognised throughout many of the spouses and partners of people who were abusing alcohol. They were actually exhibiting a similar kind of behaviour, and they often needed to be treated for that behaviour just as much as their partner or spouse needed to be treated for alcoholism. And now codependency has kind of expanded. The way that we use the term has expanded. So basically the psychological community has come to recognise that whether it is a rageaholic, an alcoholic, a workaholic, somebody with a gambling issue, or somebody with any number of destructive behaviours and tendencies, it's very often the case that that person's partner or spouse, or maybe a close family member or close friend, can start to exhibit tendencies of codependency. When you're codependent, it basically means that you surrender or sacrifice your own needs in order to tend to the needs of somebody who has issues. And it's often the case that you will just completely disregard your own boundaries, your own limitations, in favour of helping that person that you perceive to be in need of your support. And very often what ends up happening when you're codependent is that you end up enabling the person's behaviour. You enable their addiction, or you enable their emotional misbehaviour. I want to go ahead and read you guys something from Darlene Lancer, who is a marriage and family therapist and a contributor to Psych Central, which is one of my favourite websites on the internet. And she says, codependency is characterised by a person belonging to a dysfunctional, one-sided relationship where one person relies on the other for meeting nearly all of their emotional and self-esteem needs. It also describes a relationship that enables another person to maintain their irresponsible, addictive or underachieving behaviour. Do you expend all of your energy in meeting your partner's needs? Do you feel trapped in your relationship? Are you the one that is constantly making sacrifices in your relationship? Then you may be in a codependent relationship. The term codependency has been around for decades. Although it originally applied to the spouses of alcoholics, who were first called co-alcoholics, researchers revealed that the characteristics of codependence were much more prevalent in the general population than had previously been imagined. In fact, they found that if you were raised in a dysfunctional family or had an ill parent, you could also be codependent. Researchers also found that codependent symptoms get worse if left untreated. The good news is that they are reversible. Many people that are exhibiting codependent tendencies or behaviours may tell themselves that they are the only person that can help their partner or friend. They are the only person that can actually be of service to that individual that they love dearly who's having these problems. But actually what a codependent may very well be doing is enabling the individual who is struggling with addiction or struggling with bad behaviour. So the more that the codependent person is giving and giving to that individual that has problems, the more that that individual with problems is anchored into those problems and doesn't really feel that there's any true impetus to change. If you recognise that you're constantly giving of your time and your energy to help somebody who is constantly behaving in a negative way or constantly struggling with an abuse issue or something like that, then the likelihood is that you are actually enabling the behaviour. If you are giving and giving and you found yourself in this pattern with this person where you will always be there for them and you will always be the one to pick up the pieces, think about what that's doing for the psychology of the person who is addicted or affected. Think about the message that it's sending. But very often when you are codependent, you depend upon that sick relationship as well. It's almost as though you depend on the issues of that individual in order to make you feel like you are still playing an important role and like you can still give of yourself to that person. So codependency is complicated because even though somebody who is codependent is undoubtedly sacrificing a lot for the other person and compromising a lot for them, they are also utilizing the issues that that other person has as a form of control, because they want to keep hold of their role as the ultimate savior in many ways. So this can be a problem with codependency as well. I'm going to talk you through some of the key behaviors that are exhibited by somebody who might be in a codependent relationship. First of all, lots of people who are in a codependent relationship as the codependent person have low self-esteem. So they may feel that the only way to achieve that sense of worthiness or meaning as an individual is to give up everything to a person who seems to be in need. So they continue to play that role of giving and giving to the other person who is in distress, and they tell themselves that if they stop playing that role, then the sense of worth and meaning in their lives is lost. Another thing that is very significant with people who are codependent is that they feel a sense of anxiety, very strong anxiety, when it comes to the individual that they're trying to help or that they are giving a lot to. So they may feel that if they step away from the role that they've put themselves into, if they say no to that person, if they try to change the role that they're playing in that person's life, then that person might go over the edge. That person might end up, running wild or killing themselves or doing something really dangerous. So it puts the codependent in this feeling of responsibility. So even if they come to a point where they know that the role that they are playing is unhealthy and that they are enabling their partner or friend or family member, they still feel like they can't pull away, because they feel like ultimately their role is so central to that individual's life that if they stop what they're doing as the codependent, they're going to cause even more havoc. So they end up getting locked into this situation. A codependent individual will usually have very weak boundaries. They will be unable to differentiate between what is their time, what their possessions are, and then what belongs to the other person and what the other person is actually allowed to have. And a lot of times, if they are asked for favors or if they are asked to do things, they will say yes, even when every instinct in their body is telling them that they don't have time for that or they don't have energy for that. And again, this goes back to the kind of anxiety that exists around the idea of moving away from the role. Once somebody is locked into a pattern of codependency with someone else, they will feel as though their role is probably the only thing that is keeping that other person from going over the edge. And that definitely causes a lot of enabling, because the person who is exhibiting the dangerous or unhealthy behavior is made to feel as though they're allowed to continue with that behavior because there are no real consequences within the relationship. They know that the person who is codependent is always going to come running and is always going to help. And a lot of the time, the individual who's going through the issues is not even consciously thinking about that or maliciously planning that. It's just an unspoken understanding that is created between the individual with the problems and then the codependent individual who has their own set of problems, which is created by the role that they feel that they need to carry out. If you know that you're currently in a relationship where you're exhibiting some of the tendencies of codependency, the high likelihood is that you are a natural caregiver. You are someone who is naturally prone towards giving your compassion, your empathy, your time, your energy, holding space for people and wanting to be there for people. But what happens with codependency is that you've moved into the shadow side of that kind of energy. So instead of being willing to be there for people who need it and being able to hold space whilst at the same time taking care of your needs, with codependency, you've moved into a shadow area where you are sacrificing your own needs constantly and you're trying to be there for that person way too much. You will usually feel very rejected if that person doesn't want your help, or if they say that they're feeling smothered by you, or they want you to move away from them. If they want you to spend less time with them, or if they don't take your advice on board, you may feel cut to the core, as though you yourself are being rejected. And you may go to great lengths to fix somebody that you feel is really in need of fixing, which of course can be exhausting and draining for you and also dehumanizing for the other person. On top of that, if the other person is trying to manipulate you or have power over you, there's no better way to achieve that than to have you in this codependent state of mind where you are convinced that you need to fix this person, to save this person. A manipulative person will enjoy that and they will use that to the full advantage. So that's another thing about being codependent, is that you are in danger of being taken advantage of and manipulated. A codependent individual can very often be obsessive and fixated. They will worry a lot about the individual that they're in that codependent codependent connection with. They'll be very concerned about what that individual is doing, how they're spending their time and how they're feeling. And they may ask the individual that they perceive to be wounded or in need how they are feeling multiple times a week or multiple times a day. They will feel like it is ultimately their responsibility to make sure that the individual with problems is safe and feeling okay and feeling stable. If you are codependent, then there is a very high risk that you are giving so much of yourself that you are very much aware that you need to step back, or you need some time for yourself, or you may realize that your boundary is being breached by that person that you're in the codependent relationship with, but you will feel very, very unwilling to communicate that. You will feel as though it is your duty to keep quiet and keep the burden upon yourself so that the other person can be happy. And there are people that are codependent by nature who do this with multiple different relationships in their lives. So it's not just the case that there might be one individual whom you are helping and taking care of or trying to fix. It could be that across the board you just tend to be someone who does not communicate your boundaries and limits because you always constantly want to help others, and you always feel like you are the person that ultimately has to do that for them. Again, as you can imagine, somebody who is codependent by nature across the board with multiple people is ripe for exploitation and is in danger of being taken advantage of by the people in their midst who are looking for somebody that they can drain to excess, that they can use. Codependent people can end up going from one relationship to another, always finding themselves in the role of wanting to fix a broken person. And they can find over time that if they look back over a lot of their major connections in life, that they have always fallen into that role, very often without meaning to and without realizing it until later on. And one of the other issues with people who are codependent is that they can be in denial about that. So even if multiple people are saying to them, look, you can't keep helping people and trying to fix people, you've got to look after yourself, a lot of people who are codependent and have codependent tendencies will refuse to see that they are actually trying to be a savior for somebody. They will refuse to see that they need to actually start taking better care of themselves and allowing others to take responsibility for their own problems. If you're listening to some of the things that I've listed and you're thinking, that is actually me, I actually can be codependent, I do have codependent tendencies, or if you realize that overall you are in a codependent relationship right now, I would definitely urge you to consider why you are behaving this way and consider it without judgment. If you look back over what you've been through in your life, you'll probably be able to find some signs and some experiences on the timeline that will help you to understand more about why you behave this way. It could be that you constantly were having to take care of the emotions or the practical needs of a parent when you were growing up. You may have been in the midst of a parent that had a lot of difficulties and leaned upon you for a lot of things, emotionally, practically or otherwise, and so that might have led you into a pattern of feeling as though love and closeness is based around you being the saviour and the other person being in trouble and needing your help. You may find that you've actually really devalued yourself over the course of your relationships in life, allowing yourself only to get close to people who valued you for what you could provide for them and not necessarily for who you are as a human being. You might find that it feels actually really alien to let people close to you who actually want to know you for who you are. You might feel way more comfortable feeling needed for what you can provide because that's always been the status quo, that's always been the state of play. You might not even be able to believe at this point in life that you could find people who value you for who you actually are. Take some time to write down a list of your codependent behaviours and try to write a list of the things that you think actually trigger those codependent behaviours. For some people, their codependent side, if you like, doesn't really come out unless they meet with a certain kind of individual who seems to trigger them to want to be of service in that really unhealthy way. Maybe that's you. Maybe you find that there are certain kinds of people or certain characteristics or certain relationship energies that bring out that codependent tendency within you, and maybe you just need to be clear with yourself about that so that you can be aware of it when you meet those kinds of individuals and when those kinds of individuals come into your life. For other people, it can be to do with stuff that's going on inside. If they're feeling crappy about themselves, if they've gone through a difficult thing, like for example not getting that job opportunity that they really wanted, or feeling as though they were passed over for something and they feel a bit unworthy, they may then go into codependency hyperdrive and start trying to be of service to everyone and be a saviour to everyone everyone or fix that one person in their life that's got problems. And actually that's really just trying to look for a sense of worth in an unhealthy place, and that needs to be dealt with. Take responsibility for your codependent behaviors. It is very important that you recognize that when you are in a codependent state of being with somebody, you derive a sense of control and satisfaction from that. It's not just all about the other person having ultimate control over you. In fact, in some instances, it's got nothing to do with the other person wanting to have any control over you. Codependent people, or people with a codependent tendency in a relationship, are actually getting high off of the relationship dynamic themselves. There is something about it that brings fulfillment to them, even if it also feels very crappy at the same time. Lots of people who are codependent upon another for their sense of esteem and worth get a great high from feeling like the savior in a person's life. They want to be the person that can provide the support, and that very often leads to enabling and lots of other crappy stuff as well. So you have to take responsibility in one way or another for the fact that you derive a sense of comfort, satisfaction, or control from being in that codependent role. This is very difficult. It can be tough to actually admit that to yourself, but I think it is probably an important part of the work for most people who relate to a lot of the things I mentioned on the list before of tendencies in a codependent person. Make sure you realize that when you make a conscious decision to step away from your codependent behaviors, it is going to feel unpleasant. It is going to feel strange. It is not going to be nice, and you are going to want to go back to the codependent behavior. You're going to want to leap to attention and be that person that can provide that love or that nurturing or that support or that relief for the other person. And it will feel alien and weird when you decide that you're going to draw a boundary and you are not necessarily going to jump when they call you, or you're not necessarily going to fall all over yourself to be that savior when that person seems like they're in trouble. Sometimes the other person is going to feel weird about that as well, because they've become so used to you fulfilling that certain role in their life. And like I said before, it doesn't always mean that the individual who's been relying upon you has been manipulating you or controlling you. That's only true in certain cases. There are lots of cases where somebody who is codependent has just set themselves up as a figure in that person's life, an individual who is going to be there. And when they start to pull away and they're not there as much, it can leave that individual who has become reliant feeling some kind of personal way about that. If you feel that you can, you might want to get into a dialogue with that person that you're pulling away from and help them to understand where you're coming from with it, and that you need more space and time and attention for yourself. If you do feel though that you are being controlled or manipulated by the person that you have been serving and sacrificing for, then it might become a little bit more tricky to have that conversation, because you may leave yourself vulnerable to being convinced to go back to the behavior. So you've got to think about what's going on in your particular case and what might be a good way forward in terms of dialogue. When you recognize that you're being codependent with somebody and you start to draw a boundary around the degree of caretaking that you do, you have to challenge yourself to be uncomfortable in those moments. You have to feel yourself wanting to drop your boundary and just go and help that person or be there for them or do something for them. You've got to feel that desire rising up in you, and you've actually got to defy it. You've actually got to decide, no, I'm not doing that. That's not healthy. That's not helpful. That's not how I'm going to operate within the confines of this relationship anymore. And so you kind of have to really go there with yourself. You have to make that commitment, and you've got to know that when you are stepping away from those behaviors that you've always exhibited in that relationship, it does feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable. You are retraining yourself. You are training yourself to approach the relationship differently. Your ego will have become very, very used to the role that you play with that specific person, or indeed with a bunch of different people if you feel like you are codependent across the board or in a few different situations. Your ego will miss that high, and it will send out the signal that it wants to get that high again, because it's convinced that that is attached to your sense of worth innately. And it is so important that you kind of dialogue with your ego, negotiate with your ego, put your ego in a timeout, and just really explain to yourself that that is not the way you're going to do things anymore, because it's draining you, you and it's unhealthy for you, and it's not the healthiest form for your relationships with people to be in anyway. That people shouldn't feel that you're going to drop every damn thing to go to them and sacrifice everything for them. That shouldn't be how the people in your life perceive you, and it shouldn't be the extent of how you perceive yourself and your usefulness in the world. There is so much more to you than that. There is so much more to you than that. And that's really the challenge of recognizing your codependent tendencies and dealing with them. As you will notice, I'm talking a lot in this video about codependent tendencies, and that's because I wouldn't want to actually officially tell anybody that they are codependent in a relationship or not. That's not for me to do. But I do believe that if we read about codependency and if we read about what it entails and what has been learned about it, we can see whether or not we are at least exhibiting tendencies of codependency within ourselves. Oh, I rhymed. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. And then from there, we can really be like, okay, actually, I'm exhibiting quite a few of the things on this list. I'm relating to quite a lot of the things in this article. Let me deal with that. Let me check that in myself, because it's not healthy. Try to recognize that giving absolutely everything to people and sacrificing your own needs on the altar of other people's pleasure or comfort is not a way to derive emotional intimacy. Try to find emotional intimacy in different places. Try opening up about your own issues with people if you want to. Plan to do nice things with people and just have lovely outings with people. Correspond with people back and forth in a way that does not allow you to delve into that tendency that you have to be codependent. Open up to new relationships and friendships where you challenge yourself not to go into that codependent territory. Recognize that emotional intimacy doesn't have to be about you giving up everything to another person. And also, as I mentioned earlier, take accountability for the fact that you yourself, in the midst of your codependency, are being manipulative on some level, because when you feel that sense of being needed and being that one that can be a savior to someone else, that gives you a sense of worthiness and a sense of control. So you also have to take responsibility for the fact that you may be very much engineering the relationships in your life down that specific avenue so that you can get your hit and so that your ego can feel good. So you've got to take responsibility for that as well, because a lot of the time you are probably instigating a relationship based on codependency, and that's your thing to deal with. You've got to own that, and you've got to decide that you're not going to go in that direction from now on. Understand why you are attempting to stop your codependent behavior. Recognize how much better your life could be if you were not in the midst of codependent behavior. Honor your relationships by understanding that being codependent within them is not the best way to help them to flourish and to allow them to be long-term and to enable them to be healthy. I really hope this video has helped, and I hope it's given you some insight into any potential codependency that you might be exhibiting in a particular relationship or across the board. If you've experienced this, if you've been codependent, or if somebody has been codependent in a relationship with you and has tried to be the savior for you, I would love to know. And if you have any further thoughts about codependency, please let me know down below, because this has only really scratched the surface of a much larger conversation that we could have about this particular psychological phenomena. Don't forget, you can catch me on social media throughout September and beyond. Please use the hashtag #SelfLoveSept or #SelfLoveSeptember if you have things to add to the conversation on social media or on YouTube, and you want to let me know that you've made a video or you've done, a post on Instagram or any of that stuff. I will be checking the hashtags. Don't forget as well, darlings, that my shop is open throughout September. I have received emails and requests for information about whether or not I do work with clients over the course of September. And I do. I'm still doing my counselling, my mentoring, my readings and all of that. So you can click down below to go to the shop and visit the shop to grab a self-love reading or anything else that you might want to purchase from me. I am working with clients and I do have dates open for September for Skype related shizzle. So yeah, I'm here. Come and work with me. And until next time, so much love and self-love, honeybees. Blessed be.